Okay, it's finally fall. The weather is a beautiful, crisp, clear day here in October in Northern Virginia, and it's time to spend some time back in the basement. I spent last weekend at the Mideast Region NMRA convention. I was the clinic chairman. I took in some clinics and gave a couple of clinics myself and had a great time. But we're going to go ahead and do a really quick update on where we are with the layout right now. As you can see, based on what we had last time, we were just painting the walls. At this point, we have the basic framework in place everywhere. I've got the walls painted a sky blue above the up here above the benchwork, and then down below the benchwork, it's painted a color that my wife actually chose from Sherwin-Williams called Riverview, which is kind of a nice brownish gray green is probably the best way to describe it. So what we're doing right now today is spending some time down here. I made some circle templates for various curve radii, and what I'm going to do here is cut to some tests I did on the curve radiuses, various curve radiuses with the Central Vermont brass locomotives I have. I just wanted to see what the minimum radius actually was for those locomotives. So I'll go ahead and cut that in here. All right, this is an initial test of a New England Rail Service Central Vermont N5A. Okay, I've set the locomotive on a 24-inch test track. I just simply have it taped down on both ends and connected to a just regular old Tech 2 power pack that I've had for a long time with a couple of alligator clips and wires. Again, this is just to validate what minimum radius this locomotive really can take. The reason for 24 inches is one of the curves going into a paper mill spur on my plan for the new layout has a 24-inch radius curve. And if it got around a 32-inch radius curve and gets around a 24-inch radius curve, I know that the layout's mainline minimum of 36-inch radius is more than adequate for this locomotive with some trains. Even though it's raw brass right now, sometimes it's best to test these locomotives before you paint them, because if a short's going to show up because of, say, the cab roof hitting the tender, the top of the tender, or something down here touching another part of the locomotive, you'll find it out much quicker when the locomotive's not painted. Otherwise, if it's painted, it could insulate it, and then over time, the paint wears off, and all of a sudden you're having shorts in locomotives that ran perfectly fine before that. So I think we can conclude from this that the New England Rail Service Central Vermont 280 can handle the 24-inch radius curve going into the mill scene. All right, this next test will feature one of the biggest disappointments of my Central Vermont modeling career. This is a Division Point Central Vermont 210-4. It's done up as number 707, which CV steam fans know is the locomotive that lasted the longest out of this class on the Central Vermont. The problem I've always had with it is it seems to be a tremendous curve hog. I've never quite been able to get it to run around curves on my prior layouts, and so it's sat on a display shelf, which is really a shame because it is a beautiful model. So what I have set up here again is another temporary test track. This particular one is at 36-inch minimum radius. We will go ahead and see what the locomotive does on a 36-inch radius curve. We'll go ahead and back down to the start of the curve, so we go ahead the full distance of the curve. This is actually 2 pieces of flex track, so it's about 6 feet long. Okay, that time it seemed to hold onto the track, it seemed to stay on the rail. It did not derail. Let's go ahead and try it backing up across or through the full length of the curve. One last thing I'll point out is that, well, that seemed to work pretty well, but the last thing I'll point out is that the drawbar is set not at the full or absolute closest prototypical distance. There's 3 holes in the drawbar. It's at the one that permits the the vestibule here between the cab and the tender and the cab to completely fill the space without leaving an unsightly gap, but it is certainly not at the prototypical distance, but it still looks pretty good. From this I can conclude that these seem to take a minimum radius, or at least they run around a 36-inch radius. I'm going to go ahead and move the locomotive now, and then we'll try it on the 32-inch radius and see what it does. Okay, well, we moved the Division Point Central Vermont 210 forward to the 32-inch radius test curve, and now we're going to try it to see how it does on that curve. My guess is it is not going to like this curve, because this was the curve radius I had on my prior layout, and it never quite made it around it. As you can see here, I haven't changed the voltage setting on the power pack, but it's just binding, and it's almost like it's binding against the curve radius in the curve. And you can see that front driver, I don't know if you can see it on here, but that front driver has noticeably lifted from the rail right there. So I'll go ahead and stop it before we run it and tilt it on its side. I may go ahead and set up a 34-inch radius. I really don't think it's going to work any better. I think 36 is the absolute working minimum for these locomotives. And that's it for our video layout update for this month. We'll see you next month. Hopefully by then we'll have some track down and might even have a train or two running.